is the 56th anniversary of the arrest of high-ranking members of Umkhonto Sizwe at Liliesleaf Farm in Rivonia in Johannesburg. What seemed to be a working farm was actually a cover, an ANC safe house where South Africa's first democratic president, Nelson Mandela, and others were hiding out in 1963. The raid on Liliesleaf, of course, led to the Rivonia Trial and the banishment to Robben Island of Madiba and other ANC leaders like Wolpe, Sisulu and Kathrada. To discuss this high-profile historic event, we're looking back and we're joined by the founder of the Liliesleaf Trust, Nicholas Wolpe, whose father Harold was a leading figure in the struggle as well. Thank you for being with us,
My
Nicholas.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So how will you as the Liliesleaf Trust be marking tomorrow?
Well, I mean, we don't tend to mark these anniversaries, but because tomorrow's the 56th anniversary, but more specifically, tomorrow will be 56 years to the day that the raid took place.
Okay.
The SACP and the ANC have decided to honor this day and remember it because of the significance. And I think also we're getting to the point where in the next year or so, the two remaining Rivonia trialists and the one remaining trialist who was arrested at Liliesleaf won't be around. So we're almost coming to an end of a very unique era in our history.
Do you think that memory of that time is being lost?
Very much so. I think that's one of the biggest struggles that we in South Africa today are confronted with. I would say it is our new struggle. The fact that we are not inculcating into society, into the DNA fabric, our history, the meaning of our struggle, what it represented, what it articulated. The fact that we have been debating as to whether to make history compulsory within our school system says a lot. Says a lot in terms of where history is seen, how it is considered, how important it is.
Well, give us a history lesson, because your father was there, and Madiba was called the Black Pimpernel. He was hiding before that raid and then went to Liliesleaf. Just tell us about the run-up to the raid on Liliesleaf Farm.
Okay, Liliesleaf was purchased in August of '61, following the banning of the ANC, because it made it incredibly difficult, following the banning of the ANC, for the Communist Party, who had been banned 10 years earlier in 1950, to meet. So they decided to identify a safe place where they could meet, and Liliesleaf was purchased. And the lawyer that did the legal purchase was actually my father, Harold Wolpe. It evolved, as Ahmed Kathrada said, into being firstly the headquarters of the newly formed military wing, and then into what I'd like to call the inverted diaspora of the liberation movement in its totality. So it became the nerve center of our liberation struggle, the nerve center of our debates and discussions about what a new South Africa should look like.
Yeah.
And the raid, and it's again, people are unsure as to how the raid came about in terms of, was there an informer, was there a tip-off? We tend to believe that it was a tip-off from a foreign intelligence agency that gave up Liliesleaf, but more specifically were giving up the whereabouts of Walter Sisulu, who at the time had become public enemy number one.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we still don't know. So there's only speculation.
Well, there's speculation, but we would say that we are given what I'd like to call the circumstantial evidence that we have gathered. We feel very strongly that it was a foreign intelligence agency that assisted. Because interestingly, there was a gentleman by the name of Gerard Ludi who had infiltrated Bram Fischer's cell. And he was part of what was referred to as RID, the Republican Intelligence Department.
Yeah.
And when we interviewed him several years ago, the one thing he said is, we did not have the intelligence network to track the movements of those underground. We relied on foreign intelligence agencies to give us that information that was needed for us to be able to respond to specific situations.
All right, and then some went to the Rivonia Trial. Your father escaped. Can you give us personal memories? Were you born in his exile, as it were, or in South Africa? What do you remember as a kid? You were young.
At the time, I was just born, but of course, through the years, the story was retold. So shortly after the raid, Molly Fischer, Bram Fischer's wife, came to my parents' house and said to my father, look, you better get out. It's only going to be a matter of time until till they discover the link, because in fact they did.
Yeah.
He wrote the code of conduct into guerrilla warfare, and it was found at Liliesleaf. So the idea was he went up to at the time, the Bechuana border, and the idea he was going to cross the border.
Yeah.
But we believe that members of my mother's family led him into a police trap, and he was arrested, brought back to Pretoria, from Pretoria to Marshall Square, where he and 3 other comrades bribed a policeman and broke out of Marshall Square, which became known as the Great Escape. But I think the most important aspect of that escape was one has to see it within the political context of the time. At the time of the raid, the internal liberation movement had been crushed and had been destroyed. It was a hammer blow. And to the authority, to the apartheid state, they were under the impression that they had destroyed this internal liberation movement. The escape sent them a different message. The escape told them that the liberation organization structures were still functional. The reality is they weren't. But the importance of the escape was a moral boost at a time of a major setback.
So you've said this history is being lost, and if we remember those arrested, I mean, there were a whole lot of names, including your father, Walter Sisulu, Elias Motsoaledi, Andrew Mlangeni. Andrew Mlangeni, I think, will be speaking at the event you spoke about tomorrow night, the SSEP event. What's he expected to say as one of those surviving Rivonia trialists?
Well, I think he's going to talk about the consequences of the raid, the impact the raid had, but I think he will also locate it within the current political climate, the current political context, what we have been experiencing and going through. So I think he will draw a parallel between what the struggle was about, what the objectives and the goal of the struggle were about, and where we are today, and how far we have blown off course from those lofty ideals that were articulated in a very selfless, dedicated fashion by people like Andrew, people like Dennis Goldberg and others, whose names are synonymous with what the real true values of our struggle were about.
So another surviving Rivonia trialist. We will be speaking to Dennis Goldberg on the SABC tomorrow. How do you try and remember on an ongoing basis? So Liliesleaf Farm is still marked on Rivonia Road. You see the signs. If people go and visit, what do they see?
Well, they will experience a very dynamic, interactive exhibit, and they will engage with an exhibit in a very thought-provoking, dynamic fashion, because they will also hear the stories through those individuals who experienced those events. So we have tried to capture the stories of the individuals, because at the end of the day, it is those stories, those memories of those individuals that become the tapestry of our history. And it is that tapestry that we need to preserve, and through the exhibits, those stories are conveyed. People begin to learn, to begin to understand, to begin to experience what our struggle was about and what that commitment meant and what that dedication implied.
And the raid on Liliesleaf changed everything. So then you had the Rivonia trial. There was the real possibility that people could get hanged. Do you see it like that, a juncture where history could have changed?
Well, there were a number of stories which we've become aware of, and I like to refer to this movie called Sliding Doors, where you have these 2 parallel worlds developing, and there could have been 3 different parallel worlds that could have emerged from what transpired at Liliesleaf. But I do believe that ultimately there was going to be no intention of imposing the death penalty, and because I think that's why the state charged them with sabotage as opposed to treason, because under the Treasonable Act there was only one sentence that could be passed if found guilty, and that was death. Whereas under sabotage they had the option of either the death penalty or life in prison, and I think that tells a lot.
If your father were alive today, last question, what do you think he would think about the course of South African democracy?
Well, being an intellectual, being someone who is was highly critical of certain aspects and developments after 1994, I do believe that he would be critical of the current state in terms of where we've gone, in terms of how far we've blown, of course, how we have not delivered on some of the most fundamental principles of our liberation struggle, which were articulated and expressed through our Freedom Charter. So I think he would cast a very critical eye over where we are. I think he would do an analytical critique of where we went wrong, what needs to be done, how we need to put it right, and what sort of things we have done right, and how we can build upon those successes.
All right, thank you very much for your time tonight. That was the founder of the Liliesleaf Trust, and Nicholas Wolpe. His father was Harold Wolpe. And of course, tomorrow, SABC speaking to Dennis Goldberg, and Andrew Mlangeni will be speaking at that SACP event at Liliesleaf tomorrow night. We'll bring it all to you. All right, Chris Selder.